and today my guest is Enda King. He's currently Head of Performance and Development at Aspetar, and our key topic for today's chat will all be about developing a resilient athlete, insights into developing strength and mitigating injuries. So really important for strength and conditioning coaches working with field-based athletes, high performance managers, rehab coaches, and of course developing athletes. If you're tuning in and you want to stay healthy, get out the notebook and take down some notes. But thanks for joining us, Enda. Really looking forward to this chat, mate.
My pleasure, Jack, and appreciate the invitation.
No doubt majority of the audience will know about your work, but for those few that don't, do you mind providing a bit of a background? I guess how you found your passion for the industry and some of the work you've done along the way.
Yeah, so I'm currently head of performance development here at Aspetar, by trade and by background, but over time kind of evolved in terms of strength and conditioning and biomechanics, to try and provisions for the athletes that I was looking after. My current divided into some elite athlete care, mostly they come to visit us here in Doha. I'm involved in development, so consistency of care among our staff here, improving that on an annual basis, and then on special projects, how we give people a career path and how we support to evolve as clinicians and coaches on an ongoing basis. So I'm here about a year and a half now, and it's far exceeded all.
And for those that have influenced your career, who would be some sort of strong mentors, if you like, along your way to help shape your philosophy?
Yeah, I was having a think about this. I think you're obviously greatest influence within who you're surrounded by. I've been very, very lucky and work with some really good coaches and clinicians, and that's from kind of when you're a young athlete and you're being treated by physios of 2 or 3 back at home in Ireland, who I was kind of inspired to follow the care they were delivering, and then I was fortunate enough after etc. to get to work in a place called Sports Surgery Clinic in Dublin. Clinicians there, Andy Franklin Miller, in Falvey, Ray 700 or 800 ACL reconstructions a year, and Riddell Fanning, Neil Welsh, Sam Beda, Colin Griffin, and so massively influenced by those that you were around, and what you learned from them, but also organize your own thoughts based on how you bounce off them. Practice from a rehab and a performance point of view has evolved. The two big things are around motor control and motor learning. How do we, from an injury or create an environment where athletes can evolve how they move, whether from a rehabilitation point of view, and the likes of Franz Bosch, Nick Winkelman, have and lots of others, Ian Jeffrey, how you organize your exercise selection and how you create an environment movement. And then on the flip side of it, in terms of biomechanics, HD, the likes of Chris Richter, of really and Rula Kotsevaki, who work really focusing on how we measure human movement and not tell us, and how is my practice of stuff. I can do lots of training, I can do lots of rehab, but then when you reassess, are you just spending time? So I think it's by who you work with and the opportunities you have, especially here now in Aspetar. But there are certain things around strength conditioning, motor control. Those changes have been most influential.
Yeah, thank you for sharing it. And I guess from a highlights perspective, what moments or experiences sort of spring front of mind that you're most proud of to be able to achieve so far over your career?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit older, Jack. It's amazing how your career slips by pretty quickly, and and quickly. I think I've been very fortunate to I did my master's um, in Curtin University. I really enjoyed that. That was a very, very influential. I was very fortunate to do my PhD in biomechanics, and found that very, very influential, along with different strength and conditioning. When you look at career highlights, like my goal was always to be, and it's up to others to judge whether you are or not. But as start to get your first one or two Premier League players or NFL players, start to do, consultancy for a couple of bigger franchises, as you get a job like I have here in Aspetar, these up to, unbeknownst, but they're really a consequence of what's gone beforehand. So again, I feel very fortunate. I've had opportunities to work with good people and study in good places, and a lot of the high from those experiences and the opportunities afterwards that they afforded me.
No doubt. And on the flip side, mate, significant challenges that you faced over your career, and how did you grow? What did you sort of learn from those experiences?
In your early career, a bit of everything and nothing of anything, and so it can be a bit to look at, how do I start to evolve my career passion. I think with that, you reach and be focused on 100 different things and not necessarily be evolving or in any of them. A book I found really, really influential was called "So Good They Can't Ignore You" by Cal Newport, and craftsman's mindset. So you kind of, review where you're good at some things, you're not so good at other things, or not that you're not so good at them, but not as good as you. How do you set challenges and opportunities for yourself on an annual basis? And I think that's a constant work in progress, regardless of what stage you are in your career. Especially boxes, you do your masters, you do your PhD, but how do you continue to make sure going? And then I suppose you technician, whether that's a coach or whether that's a physio or a clinician, but then as you drift more into management and leadership and stuff like that, which is an entirely different to what you are supposedly good at as it from a technical point of view. So evolving those skills around team development strategy and around motivating people to move the tank in a direction on a constant basis. That as you come from the early, that's an entirely different skill set, and thoroughly enjoyable, but certainly something that progress.
Absolutely. Well, we'll dive straight into the topic in terms of developing resilient athletes, both from a strength conditioning point of view, but also to mitigate injuries. I guess to kick it off, what does developing resilient athletes sort of mean to you?
Yeah, I think resilience, obviously, to tolerate the demands of the sport and to consistently be able to perform. I was very recently a few franchises, and a quote that was on one of the walls of the NFL teams was an ability. And I thought that really, it hit home quite a grind of an NFL season. You can be very good, but if you're not available for select form, then what you see to the franchise. And so it is having the ability for their body to tolerate the demands of the basis and to be able to tolerate the natural fluctuations that your lists in picking up knocks and niggles and bangs that game, and to be able to continue to develop throughout. There's a number of different components that it's obviously very individualized. The Tour de France last night, and you look at the resilience of and the demands of their sport, what they're trying to do over 20 days is quite incredible, versus the ability to tolerate a Premier League season or an. It comes back to understanding that individual athletes, their strengths and weaknesses, between what you're asking them to do and what they're able to do, and then targeting.
And I guess what are some common misconceptions when it comes to injury mitigation for athletes? How could you sort of dispel them?
Yeah, I think a lot of our profile tends to focus on one thing. So, like, exercise prevents injury, or if you load manage, that prevents whatever else. And in the reality is, we're primary approaches to a group of athletes who are all very, very different history, their training load, their injury history, etc. One of the big myths is that there's a silver bullet from, and there isn't, or at least in my experience, there isn't. That every looking to build robust athletes, it's always around their anatomy, specific to their sport, and the training and playing load. So, like, if you have a very, very hip or a very degenerative patellar tendon, what it can tolerate is very different, as an example, and you need to work around that and modify accordingly. If you're a very young athlete coming into the senior ranks, the training load that you've tolerated recently is what you're going to be asked to do in the near future. You can do lots of hamstring strengthening, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to put your hamstring strengthening things, and therefore how you move also comes into it. So I think a silver bullet, if you do this, you'll stop all of this type of injury. If you do that, things have been shown to be more effective than others, but that individual and all those processes, and that's probably where you're going to be most successful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's a great, I guess, mindset for athletes to have, and also coaches in keeping it real. In terms of, I guess, practical tips for both athletes and coaches, what do you find is over the years have you found is sort of what are the basics? What are the most, what are your big rocks when it comes to, uh, rehabilitating athletes and making sure they return back to confidence and return back to performance?
I think, again, it comes back to individualized. So you talk about performance. So from a conditioning point of view, where are my deficits, or what do I need to be able to tolerate to get back up to that level? You, rather than sort of saying, every serious injury is calf weakness. That's a piece of it, but so is your explosiveness, so is your running mechanics, and so having a very broad, all the components that can contribute to that injury, and then how relative to that is very constantly measuring and remeasuring. We're at the minute currently we talk a lot about make the right wall. People do a lot of rehab, they try very hard, only to realize when they go they're not able to perform their best, or they get re-injured, and haven't a clear idea of all the contributing factors, and I'm not constantly the boxes as I go along. And next thing I do a 6-week program, only to read it wasn't individualized, or my body responded a little bit different to it, and not modifying accordingly.
And then from, I guess, the art side of things, like how do you, when you're working with an athlete one-on-one, or you're managing a group of athletes, how do you find that balance on knowing when to push and when to pull back, in the moment? So obviously you've got your plan, but yeah, what are some of the key areas that you sort of take into account when you might scale the load, or drop back the load, or increase the load in session?
I think, starting with a very important, you have an idea of what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then what you want this training block to achieve. There naturally is a, over an intensive training block accumulates over time. So building in those appropriate recovery periods are important, but you need to write a 4-week block or a 6-week block. But again, depending on their training history, some athletes will be able to tolerate more, some athletes will be able to tolerate great lesson. Each session on its own merits, and making sure that we're maximizing the quality of that session is very important. And I think having in what you do, so there's, people become fatigued for various reasons. It is often one of those things. The body loves variety of stimulus, of conditioning. There's lots of different ways of specific skills or developing hamstring strength, just to pick three different qualities. And so we need a consistency of theme and progressive overload programming. We need to build in as much variety and the athlete mentally and physically. And when I look back at some of my programs where they plateaued a little bit, how much of that was an accumulation of fatigue, or how much of it was a lack that could have allowed us to make ongoing changes. So I think having a clear plan, program according, but variety of stimulus, but also from a psychological point of view, is an area that requires a lot of planning. Creates much more consistency in your program.
And from a, I guess, going back to sort of rehabilitation for, I guess, groin injuries, what are some of the most important exercises do you feel if someone's got a groin pathology and they're returning back to their field of sport, but they're in a phase where they might be just straight line running in the current phase? What are some areas that you need to sort of develop in the gym to bridge the gap for what they're not getting in on the field yet, and to be able to prepare them for sprinting and agility?
Yeah, I think you could split that a little into acute groin injury, a muscular tendinous tear. Obviously, we need to redevelop the strength of that injured muscle group so it can tolerate the load. I think a lot of injuries, the focus on rehab is the frontal plane and hip adduction in particular. They're very powerful hip flexors, and many of the injuries in terms of acceleration are more to do with the sagittal plane than they are alone to do with a free kick. So I think training patterns of movement and getting strong in those muscle groups is important. I think your chronic, more overloaded groin injuries of adductor groups, the low abdominals, and a lot of time on strengthening where the injury is, rather than identify that area become overloaded in the first place. And you'll see lots of who have very strong adductors, but your pelvic tilt, which is influencing the of the adductors, or the very poor, which is again causing compensations through the adductors. Again, focusing away from where they're sore and focusing more on lumbo-pelvic control in the gym during your compound movements, your squats, your deadlifts, your press, your bench press. We all see people loads of bench pressing, and you could drive a bus under that good trunk stability. But also concurrently making sure and control around the foot and ankle and around the hip, because very as a consequence of what's not happening proximal and distal to that area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Yeah, thank you for that, answering that. And I guess going from a technology, how does the advancements in sports science tech sort of change your methods and principles when it comes to return to play?
I think there is the ability, whether that is using GPS data of intense relating capital, but better, and biomechanical improved. So while we will always need to do testing my abduction strength or my eyes and hamstrings, that doesn't tell me when we're jumping and landing mechanics or my running and change direction. And so we get much better at seeing, is my set out to achieve, or am I just doing lots of, and then sick because we've given it enough time but we perhaps haven't or addressed the consequence of that injury. Third, better at individualizing the stimulus, whether that velocity-based training units or EM. I think we are in session able to use technology much getting our pound of flesh within that session. So it's all good, right? Reps of X sets, but am I achieving it? Yeah, reps that I've trained hard within that stimulus or day. And so I think using technology in session is allowing we get the most of each session. Time is valuable in a rehab, going to the effort of executing those sessions, but are you really making the most value for money in terms of your time? So I think being able and sport improving with the data that we have available, being able programs in terms of biomechanics is improving, and being able to make our getting the adaptation or getting the is also improving, and all of those things are hopefully allowing for quicker transitions.
And from the biomechanical point of view, like how quick do you like to see change with an athlete that you may perhaps working with them in a full-time setting? Is that a matter of weeks where you'd like to see it? Is it within session with things like running gait? Talk us through that in terms of changes that you like to see from a coordination point of view and efficiency.
So it's really interesting. Like there are the three pieces. It's the task that you ask them to do. It's the environment, and it's them as an individual. And so, underpinned by the physical qualities. So I give an exaggeration. If you have quads asymmetry of 50% after ACL injury, just to exaggerate, you can change direction mechanics without resolving those individual strength deficits. It's very important, if you're going to be effective in influencing human movement, physical qualities is going to be a key component of it. But assuming that you have those, you expect to see very nice changes in particular running, jumping, and change direction within the nice carryover between sessions. So certainly if I was doing running mechanics just on a treadmill, which obviously isn't sport specific, but just look at, you would look to see changes certainly every 7 to 10 with their change direction mechanics in the lab. You'd like to see very substantial changes. And those movements are tasks. That doesn't mean then that they will execute like that on the field of play. It means that their vocabulary is improved, that they have the repertoire in the play. So I can do lovely change direction mechanics, but final are serving a serve at me. There's no way I'm going to organize my flexion quick enough in order to be able to return it. So a lot of it then is the I think if you have the baseline physical qualities, the underlying running and change direction, if you create the right tasks and the right environment, it changes in quite short periods of time.
And that what you mentioned there resonated with me. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to see direct transfer in the context of playing the sport with their running mechanics, but you sort of look at it from the mindset that you've increased their vocabulary, they've got more, their movement competency in general, more options to move, and you've just made that athlete a more efficient athlete in general rather than specifically when they're playing the game.
I tried to describe it to the athlete in that your baseline physical qualities, power, they're like your words, your vocabulary, your that's how you start to bring that vocabulary together, and then the sport is whatever song you're singing. If you have a limited vocabulary, it's going to influence what you're able to do on the field of play. There's no perfect. I have no idea what perfect is, but room for error I have in each of these qualities specific to my sport is I'll be able to perform my best and also be able to tolerate the demands of the game.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for clarifying. That's a good analogy. The I guess the mental side of rehabilitation, it can be one of the lowest point and a lonely place for athletes. As a practitioner, how do you sort of approach that? How do you get yourself, I guess, in a right mind frame to be able to support the athlete, but also stretch them and push them through to be able to progress them in their training?
Yeah, I think greater mental challenges are either on the big injuries, like an ACL, or ones where athletes have done lots of rehab and think, how do we reframe within that? And so I think having great of your process about where they are as an individual athlete, their biomechanical diagnosis, what their strength is like, what their plyometrics are like how they map back to where you think they need to go, and the level of conditioning they're doing, the goal setting and saying, for this block of rehab, our goal is the next 4 weeks. That will build on this, and then when we've those two done, we'll be ready to return. It allows them to cut the elephant up into small pieces. On number one is that the block of work that's in front of them, but also to have great in their program is contributing to resolving their problem. That not alone allows them to be motivated, it improves their goal setting. It also it brings that degree of self-efficacy in that, right, okay, now for return, I can see each of the landmarks along the way. My confidence improves when I see myself ticking these boxes and having the metrics to show them. And then, as I said, in the longer term rehabs, it's just maintaining that bit of 100 different ways of developing every physical quality. The main thing is, end of every block, can we reassess and show that what we've done has affected change? Can the athletes see how that's a piece of the jigsaw contributing to it? So I think longer term injuries, they get overwhelmed by the amount of time, despite the fact quickly. And in the recurrent injuries, they struggle for a while and things haven't worked out. So being able to be very clear with them about, you haven't done the right things. I'm just saying, today this is how you look like, and look like in order to give yourself the most chance of success. And here's what we're going to do to get you there. And once the athlete starts not against their buy-in and their motivation, their recalibration is really quick. Or a clinician, make sure you tick the boxes in a timely fashion and don't let them down.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Enda. And from a stories perspective, is there any that sort of stand out in your experience where perhaps the traditional way of returning an athlete from a groin injury, ACL, hamstring, wasn't working? They've had a few recurring issues, and you sort of had to think outside the box to return that athlete successfully?
Yeah, I think, we all say, that all my athletes have got better. So it's easy to say, well, I've got the better. So I think there have been a number of chronic groin injuries where they've gone from to surgery and not worked out and come back. But I think an even bigger is, when you have an athlete that you've rehabilitated and feel that they have come back well, and they want to come back for another block of work with you, because they can see the value to their robustness and they can see the value to their. I think that's when you really have buy-in from the athlete in the process. They understand what they need to do to get their individual body right to complement their sport-specific trainer clubs. And I think, for me, that's when you a player looking to come back, not because they're injured, but because they want to expand their robust made of a player coming because they've seen the other athlete doing X, Y, from it, and then wanting to know what their individual deficits are. I think that's when I feel, right, that the message is sinking in here. The players are buying in and taking, and no one cares about injury prevention when you're not injured. Like, we're less. But once we can tie that back into athletic development and individualizing it, I think people's compliance and buy-in, and that's when you're really winning, when the athletes are driving the process rather than the coaches.
And bit of a side question, but I guess for the parents of developing athletes or younger athletes listening in that perhaps don't have the support of a physiotherapist and strength and conditioning coach in their corner, what would be some um, helpful practical tips that they could apply to their weekly routine to ensure that they're to help mitigate injury and have a long career?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I saw this morning of um of two Premier League, very very big money, and a picture of them um when they were under four Premier League club because they weren't good enough. And there's now that selection in youth teams usually does not of selection in senior teams or at the highest level. So I and ensure that you're doing and nearly all development issues that I would see, and obviously I'm biased by being from management, or sorry, trying to do too many things with too many sports. So having periods of recovery built into your week where training is hugely important. And I think the second for any athlete, regardless of a little bit better developed at the end of the season than at the beginning of the season. And so again, people are doing lots of stuff, but whether that's their gym, again, not necessarily lifting heavy weights, but being able to front squat well. Front squat well is to be able to carry all the way through your athletic development. Some rudimentary plyometric and running mechanics, evolving and getting better at all the time. I think important, and so when you see young athletes coming, they're either burnt out because they're not enjoying what they're doing, they're either broken because is just massively inappropriate, or actually what you went very high through adolescence, and then I see them in their early 20s when the big hip issues of what happened through adolescence. And number three is with their sport, but they're not necessarily good athletes. So just having that athletic development, there's any amount of research papers show now that important in sport, it helps their overall athletic development. Again, doesn't mean that you need to play 5 sports 12 times a week. Take your fights and have some variety of stimulus in what you're doing.
I love that. Thank you for sharing those 4 tips. Is there anything when it comes to developing a robust athlete that we haven't discussed before we start to wrap it up, Enda, that you'd like to elaborate or to
No,
share on the topic?
I think I think when you're looking at robustness, it's bringing it back to their sport, or the NFL or the Premier League means different, and I think it's always having that. Am I suitably conditioned in a sensible manner? Have I individual deficits that limit me more susceptible to developing and to your knee pain or Achilles issues or whatever else? And am I moving a little bit better, whatever that means, at the end of every other month? And I think if we're doing that in a sensible manner, one of the best ways of being resilient is to stay continuously playing your sport. In out is when some of the greatest challenges are from a performance point of view. And I think just having that individualized consistency is the athletes drive it is where the most success will come from.
Very good. Thank you for sharing, and really appreciate the tips and advice that you've given both for strength and conditioning coaches, but also for young developing athletes or even mature athletes looking to prolong their career. In your work life, mate, do you have any pet peeves? Anything sort of fires you up about the industry or the job itself?
Because it's easy to see not the plank on your own. I'd say that there's two things I think that I've got better at not being here. I don't enjoy negative people. Those that have a task orientated mindset, I tend to get along better with. And that craftsman's mindset that we were talking about, I don't think you'd by being on social media, picking holes in other people's work, big long threads, talking about stuff. I think you learn by interest, developing, ways of with your colleagues and identifying where your individual deficits are, blurring opinion on social media. I've got much better at pressing the mute button than it annoys me far less than it used to. But I think focus on yourself and where your strengths and weaknesses are, and you bring positive people who want to work with you. I think you'll improve on an ongoing basis.
Oh, well said. And favourite way to spend a day off?
Good question. I think the day starts with exercise at some stage. As I get a little bit older and a little bit stiffer, endorphins and the mobility going in the morning is usually good. Certainly family time. I've a wife and 3 young kids, and they certainly bring the ego down and a good degree of reality to everything that you do. Because there's somewhere I think that rounds it off pretty well.
Yeah, it's a good day. And then we're recording this interview in July, so middle of 2023. What's on the horizon for the rest of the year? Sounds like there's plenty happening. What are you most excited about?
Yeah, I suppose the big landmark for us here in Aspetar, ACL Rehabilitation Conference in November, attracted a really outstanding international faculty of world excellence. I'm very excited about it as an attendee as much as anything else. Here is you get to build a program or invite the best in the world and just what they have to say. So I'm incredibly excited about that and of new programs and facility redevelopments happening here for last time. But if you're looking for some winter sunshine, there's very few better places than it. So hopefully we'll have to come and visit.
Absolutely. And the ticket's still available for those that want to book?
Yeah, absolutely. I can say I'm posting, but if you go to the Aspetar website, there is a link there for the AS conference, and we're a number of months out yet, but we're well over halfway full. Towards the end of the summer, things are going to pack out quite quickly. So there's discounted accommodation with our various conference partners. So again, to come and travel.
Very good. And for those that have follow-up questions, where's the best place to catch you and ask some questions and to connect?
Yeah, I'm passive in social media, pushing out any good content that I see from other people, but certainly on Instagram. And if anyone ever sends me a question, I'm more than happy to follow up with the website as well. And king.com. Research papers are up there and various points of contact as well. So about it, I definitely will get back to everyone. But yeah, all was welcome.
Very good. Well, thanks again, Enda. And yeah, well, for those listening in, you might be listening to the recording while driving the car. I know that's how I like to listen to my podcasts. You don't need to stress about the website and Enda's Instagram. If you're not following him already, we'll make sure to add both those links to our show notes so you can easily access it there. And yeah, thank you again, Enda, for tuning in and sharing with us your time and your experiences in the industry. I took a lot from it, and no doubt the listeners did as well. For those that tuned in halfway through this live, you can find the full interview on our YouTube channel if you just search for Prepare Like a Pro in the live playlist section, and we'll post it on our podcast, iTunes and Spotify in the next 2 weeks. Our next live chat interview is with Jonathan Weekly. That's next week, the 26th of July at 3 p.m. So I'll see you guys then. Thanks again, Enda.
Thank you very much, Jack. Keep up the great work. Thank you.